Hi, this is Nathan. You're about to enter a place of humor, analysis, and discovery. Welcome to the Wad Fam Chalk Pod.
Hello and welcome to the Wad Fam Chalk Pod. I'm Dylan Weaver.
And I'm Andrew Sabo.
And we are joined again this week by...
Drew Huber.
Hey, look at that.
I guess got
it's
it
Drew
right.
again.
No way.
Congratulations, buddy. You did a good job.
Thank you. I'm glad to be back.
Yeah. And what are we talking about today, Dylan?
We are talking about, and this will come as a shocker to everyone, part 2 of Bernard and Joseph.
Oh, shoot, really? I prepared for another one. Okay.
Drew accidentally prepared for part 2 of Bernard and Esther.
Yeah.
So this is the episode that comes right after the last one. It aired a week later. It's the next track on the album. It's written and directed by Phil Lawler again. None of this should come as a surprise. It on the wiki, it is a full 6% lower as far as the episode ratings go.
Wow.
So people don't like this one as much as the previous one.
Wow.
We can talk about what all that could possibly mean. Cast wise, this episode we have Bob Hoose, in addition to playing Simeon, now playing Wine Taster. I assume that is first name, last name.
Yes. Taster. Wine taster.
We also have Bob Luttrell as the baker. And Chuck Bolte as Pharaoh. A performance that I have zero thoughts about, and we will get into.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you pick up that it was Chuck Bolte, Andrew?
Yeah. That did.
Did he sound a little bit George Barkley to you?
Yeah. Well, if we're talking about voices, Will Ryan sounds a lot like Petrie in this episode.
Oh, I didn't clock it, but that checks out.
His voice, because he's doing a slightly different voice, it goes into an upper register at times, and as soon as he does that, it's just pterodactyl right there.
Yeah, I need to revisit Land Before Time to get that full Will Ryan experience.
Is the guy who played the cupbearer the same guy as who played Job? Is that the same person? Because it sounded in his cupbearer voice.
We're talking about the wine taster.
Yeah, sorry.
Not the cupbearer. Wine taster. First name wine, last name taster.
Yes.
Unlike James
Did
Bond.
Mr. Taster play Job? Because when he was whining and complaining and fake drunk, it sounded a lot like Job when he was tearing his clothes.
He did not. Job was Walker Edmondson.
Okay, understood.
And it's Bob Hoose who's being wine taster. But, yeah. Good thought, though.
Thank you. See, my Odyssey knowledge is so minimal.
Well, and it wouldn't have surprised me, because Bob Hoose is, like, one of the, like... Or, sorry, not Bob Hoose. Who were we talking... Oh, yeah, Walker Bob Hoose was wine taster. It's just one of, like, the regular players.
Mm-hmm. Understood.
So, he's a sound engineer, maybe? I forget what his official role on the show is.
So, we've got a promo.
We do have a promo.
Got a promo.
You want to listen to a promo, guys?
I want to listen to a promo.
Jinx, you owe me a promo.
Next time on Adventures in Odyssey.
Hi, Mr. Walton. That was neat, Mr. Walton.
The story of the exciting life and profound faith of one of the Old Testament's most beloved characters.
Oh, we both had dreams last night.
Yes, strange dreams.
Find out what happens next time on Adventures in Odyssey.
Is it just me, or did Bernard falling in the bucket sound way more dramatic in the promo than it did in the episode?
No, I think both were very much just like, is he dead? Like, the sound it makes... And
I could hear him falling in water. When that happened, I didn't need him to say that he fell in his bucket. I knew exactly what happened. So well done to the audio
Bernard
engineers.
didn't say that he fell in his bucket.
He says, help me get my foot out of the bucket.
Correct, but Artie says, I've never seen someone jump straight up and land in a bucket before.
Yeah, I'm imagining a cat type situation where you scare it and it just goes up and their legs are straight down. Just straight up, straight down, but bucket underneath them the second time.
The bucket magically appeared.
Do you have a bucket on your foot?
Well done, Andrew.
Thank you.
Well done. Honestly, though, before we get to the bucket, we need to talk about Chris's beginning to this episode.
Yes.
Hey, you guys know how all those stories these days involve revenge?
And how the message is always the same. If someone hurts you, you have every right to get back at them.
Because that's what a revenge tale is. Revenge tales never include the person who is out for revenge wrecking their own life in order to get revenge. That's not the way movies work.
Never.
And also, this is a story of revenge. That's the point of Joseph, right?
Okay, and that's an interesting point that I would like to talk about a little bit later, because is Joseph a jerk, kind of?
That is an interesting question, because yes, I would like to talk about this
There's
as well.
some ongoing, because of the timeline, that I had always kind of thought, like, it had always stuck out to me when I read it, like, in the Bible, but especially hearing it now, I was like, yeah, he really just messed with his brothers, like, a lot, like...
Oh, we have stuff to talk about there.
Yeah. Let's just get right...
But yes, it is very important off the top to know that this is a tale about revenge. And no, that's not something Bernard will talk about in the episode, or the Bible will mention, but it is something that Chris will say at the beginning and the end to frame it.
To be fair, Bernard doesn't talk about any morality in this at all. Like, he literally just tells the story and already just says cool story, and like that's the whole bit. Like that's it. Like it isn't even. They don't even make
it at the end where he's really upset that people think he's good at telling stories.
Okay, well there's that. But like the whole pretense of the first one, where like they tried to weave something together, like it's just they don't even try this time. They're just like, we're just telling a story.
They didn't have to, because they did that the first one, and the whole point was that they didn't finish it, and so the next logical step is to finish it.
Well, and also, we have Chris telling us that it's about revenge.
Which I mean, okay, that's a fair point. They talk, like, there is a theme of revenge. Not revenge, but that is a potential theme, in Joseph that you can pull out. But, like, that's still just a small part of this overarching narrative of Joseph, which, I would argue, is God's sovereignty, which was supposed to be the point of the first episode, but was not.
Yeah,
and I think if they just carried that through and actually tried a little bit, you could have made a really great...
Now that you mention it, they didn't carry that through at all.
They didn't even... Well, first off, they didn't even talk about it last time.
Right, I was going to say, it wasn't talked about in the first one. There is a line at the very end of this episode that is just like, oh yeah, this was all God's plan. Mm-hmm. And that is, in these entire 2 episodes, the only mention we get, and we'll get into it, but there is a clear point at which Bernard could make that point, and he doesn't, and it is bad.
Yeah, it doesn't quite make a lot of sense, but you know.
So yeah, what we have, so as we discussed, then Artie scares Bernard. Mm-hmm. He lands in the water bucket, and then Artie is like, so you're gonna finish the story, and he's like, what story? And Artie then, for the listener, recaps what we had last episode,
but only the last like one thing,
right?
Like he was in jail, then he was in charge of the like that's all he touches on, which is fine. You know, that's whatever. But like, if you're gonna give me a hot recap, like, you know, the Joseph guy,
he's a child,
sold his brother. Well, no, I'm okay. Yes, but the point of this is clearly
this is also like a Sunday school story.
Yeah.
Most children know it. It's weird that Artie didn't.
Well, yeah, Bernard does make that point very clear.
Yeah.
Shame on him.
I know.
Kids these days.
Tell
you what.
There's a lot of revenge going around with kids these days.
You know, in the toy section at Target, it's just like, it's like Lord of the Flies. There's just children running around with Hot Wheels on sticks, just like, ah!
So, with that in mind, the dream telling sequence.
Oh, yes.
So we get Joseph in, like, basically it jumps back into the story. Joseph is in jail with the new baker and the wine taster, as we've mentioned.
The new baker?
Well, yeah, not the new baker. Just the king's baker and the king's wine taster. And they come up to him and they're talking about...
No, I believe these people's names are baker and wine taster.
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, at least in the eyes of Focus on the Family, a.k.a. God, I think so.
I mean, to be
and
fair,
Pharaoh,
in the Bible,
God.
it's just cupbearer and chief baker. Chief cupbearer and chief baker, biblically. So, I mean, they don't really get a great name.
No, I recognize that. It's very much
It's very much a strange thing because everybody else has names and they don't.
Well, except for Potiphar's wife.
Yep.
Yeah, Potiphar's wife.
Potiphar.
Potiphar.
I mean, which is a trend throughout the
Potiphar.
Bible. I believe Lot's wife is also just Lot's wife.
Yeah.
But anyways, wine taster. First name wine, last name taster. I'm gonna beat that to death. So they spew off their dreams, and so wine taster goes first, and Joseph's like, "Oh, it's great! In 3 days, you're gonna be a wine taster again." Mm-hmm. And then the baker's like, "Oh, sweet! My dream must mean the same thing." And he's like, "Nope, your dream means you die in 3 days."
Yeah, and he prefaces it by saying, like, well, sometimes dreams aren't always good. And I'm like...
yeah, really telegraph this.
Yeah.
And then Artie interrupts to be like, executed? And Bernard's like, yeah, it happens.
Yeah.
And they just go back into the story. Like,
it's ancient Egypt. They killed people.
Honestly, as far as that sequence is concerned, other than that weird conversation in between with the baker and Joseph, like, that's basically how it happens in the Bible. I really have no...
Yeah,
even down to what they talk about in the dreams, like that was pretty much that was pretty close. So I have no
notes.
Well done, Focus on the Family on that one. Yeah. You nailed it.
And then Joseph tells wine taster to go earn him favor with the pharaoh.
Yes.
And then we jump 2 years into the future.
Yeah, because he forgot about Joseph, which.
Or like he forgot, or he just did that thing that like everyone does where they're like, oh well, like I don't want, like, I just got back into Pharaoh's good graces, I don't want to burn all my capital trying to bail out this guy in a prison who like told me what my dream meant, but also like he didn't actually gain me anything. Like, this was gonna happen either way. I just knew 3 days in advance. Like
no, he just gave him a little bit of a hope for 3 days there.
Right.
Yeah. Either way, he didn't say anything to Pharaoh for 2 years.
Yeah.
However you want to slice it.
Which I feel so bad for Joseph in the sense that it's just like, okay, I get it. 6 months, a year, but like 2 years.
Oh, the timeline of this episode is, of this story in the Bible is so... just like, it's so much time.
Yeah, no, there's a large span of time,
which I don't
especially when we get to the famine.
Yeah, which I don't think is something I ever really thought about with it. Mm-hmm. Just in that, like, it's not. Yeah, as we talked about last episode, it's not a passage that I've revisited recently, and so like I don't know if the gravity's quite there, and like it's not something that like the Ballad of Little Joe hammers home real hard. Yeah. Of like, it's been like. Freaking Reuben has children. Yeah. Like it is. Yeah. Some time has passed.
Mm-hmm. Which again adds, because I didn't really appreciate that in my previous readings and stuff. Maybe I did a little bit, but this time around, definitely making me think more so with what Joseph is doing, kind of behind the scenes and stuff, because they don't really talk much about his relationship with God, in the sense that, like, they talk about David's relationship with God, where it's like he's praying, we have lots of documented evidence of like what he's saying and kind of the emotions that he's feeling and what he's going through, whereas the story of Joseph, where I feel like it could definitely benefit from some insight as far as fleshing out his character, because we get some actions that it's hard to tell how much of it has been planned ahead by him and how much of it is just kind of happening.
Like you're saying like, what part of this episode is Joseph's agency versus what part is God's sovereignty?
Yeah, I guess that would be the question that you should ask. Yeah. But let's get to Pharaoh's dream.
Let's get to Pharaoh's accent.
Yep. Is it Boston? Is it New York? Which one?
Either way.
Yeah, it's definitely like a New England accent. I don't know.
Northeastern accent.
Maybe Connecticut?
It is. It's so bold, though.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
It is such a choice.
It sounds kind of like Harlow Doyle a little bit.
It feels like this thing, and maybe this isn't the case, but like for Chuck Bolte, who is not a voice actor by trade, it just feels like him being like, well, this can't sound like George Barkley, so let me just make a really strong choice in a direction.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, I'm kind of glad he doesn't do like what Hal Smith did with doing like the weird Middle Eastern thing, but making him
slightly German,
but just giving him this very like, New York, Boston-y accent was just like, oh, this is a strong choice.
Well, and they do that a lot in Odyssey. Now that you say that, thinking back, like, when they did, like, Nebuchadnezzar and stuff like that, like, whenever there's a big bad guy, they always give him a goofy accent.
Well, Pharaoh's not bad in this story.
No.
Pharaoh's a good guy.
Yeah.
Almost, in this story.
I mean, he has Baker executed, but otherwise.
No, but like...
We also don't know what Baker did.
But positions of foreign
Does the
power.
Bible say what Baker did?
The Bible does not say what Baker did. It actually just says that Pharaoh got mad at his servants. And he put them in jail. And then he killed the baker. And restored the cupbearer. So.
Wine taster.
First name wine. Last name taster.
But
why?
I do find that to be like a funny switch where it's like, so you wanted like, you didn't think children would understand what a cupbearer was, so you changed it to wine taster.
Yeah,
but then like
a 6-year-old is really gonna vibe with that,
right? But now you're just talking about wine.
Well, and they've used cupbearer in Odyssey before, or at other times. I know that they definitely have.
Okay.
Like, because I know that they, because David was Saul's cupbearer, wasn't he? Yeah.
I don't remember off the top of my head.
I also...
he very well might have been. I know he played music for him. I don't remember his exact position.
But regardless, it is just a funny thing of being like, okay, we can't say cupbearer, so we're just gonna name this guy wine taster. That'll clear up all confusion.
And, so when he comes in, so the Pharaoh can't get his dream figured out. Cool, whatever.
Yep.
So then the cupbearer's like, oh, Pharaoh, and he's like acting like he's just drunk out of his mind. And Pharaoh's like, oh, whatever, it's just the wine taster, get out of here. Like, that's not it at all, dude. The cupbearer, okay, so according to the JVL, or the Jewish Virtual Library, which has all sorts of wonderful resources, and I highly recommend checking them out if you're doing Old Testament research. The cupbearer is a high-ranking official primarily in charge of serving wine to the king. Since he was close to the person of the king, who feared intrigue and the possibility of poisoned food, the cupbearer was required to be a man of irreproachable loyalty, capable of winning the king's complete confidence, is also considered a high-ranking official in court. Like, he's not just some dude who drinks your wine.
He's kind of he's like kind of... Neither of you have seen Game of Thrones, but he's kind of like the hand of the king, like on that council there. Like, where he's like, he's not like a strategy person, but like he's a person of high authority in the king's court.
Sure. Yeah, he's more than just the wine dude. He has the king's jester. Complete confidence and is a high-ranking official in his court. Like,
Pharaoh!
Yeah, so the Pharaoh also wouldn't just be like, oh, it's just the wine taster, get out of my sight. Like, he'd be like, okay, gonna listen to you. And also, he's not just drunk all the time, because that would totally defeat the purpose of what his job is.
But this is the point in which first name wine, last name taster is felt really strongly, when Pharaoh just goes, wine taster!
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, he just calls him that.
Upsetting.
It's really
Which,
funny.
I guess Pharaoh was essentially a god, so like... You know what? If anybody's gonna have that kind of an ego complex to just call somebody by their title instead of using their name, I'm okay with it being Pharaoh.
Well, also, the other thing that I have a problem with is Pharaoh, because he's just portrayed as, like, a dunce.
Yeah, exactly. They totally, like, trivialize his authority and his intelligence and
absolutely
stuff.
It removes the severity and danger from when Joseph is talking to him. Like, what Joseph's doing is not just, like, this chummy thing like it's portrayed as. Like, he's going in front of Pharaoh, and he could be killed just because he's, like...
Hebrew.
He wanted to.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't even have to be just because Pharaoh decided that day he wants him dead.
Right.
Like, and this particular Pharaoh, the specific one, no one's sure of, but it's likely part of either the 14th or 15th dynasty, both of which were in the second intermediate period, which is basically like they were foreign rulers for the most part. Like, they weren't like Egyptians. They were either some form of Canaanite or Hyksos is the other. I don't know how to pronounce it. But basically, they came in and had to be especially ruthless and violent to keep power because they weren't Egyptians. And at this point in the story at least, the Pharaoh didn't own the land of Egypt like he will later after the audio technically ends. There's a couple more chapters in the story where it talks about how he gets that. Thanks, Joseph. So at this point, he's like fighting for power and like doesn't show weakness and is very violent and ruthless. And in this whole thing, it's portrayed as like he has no idea what to do and is just some chum, and Joseph is coming in and like
I get some like Prince John from like Disney's Robin Hood, Sexy Fox Robin Hood.
Best movie.
Yeah, like very much just kind of like okay, yeah, I get that you're supposed to be a king, but you definitely don't really act like you have that authority.
Yeah.
And it definitely, I think in situations like this, it's the hard balance that you have to walk with when you're telling a story that has serious elements to children. And I think that Bernard, I think that if they had been more intentional about making a moral narrative consistent throughout it, and Joseph having courage and being delivered by God despite adverse circumstances, then it would have made a lot of sense for him to be like, if you show Joseph being worried a little bit, or if you show Pharaoh being meaner, and then you get Bernard coming in and being like, yeah, and because God made, because God blessed everything that Joseph did, this all worked out.
Yeah. And I think that's really missing, because Joseph is incredibly bold in the Bible, even more bold than he is in the audio, because he doesn't wait for Pharaoh to ask who should be in charge or anything like that. He's just like, look, here's what's going to happen, and you need to put someone in charge right away to get the grain and get all this stuff. And then Pharaoh chooses Joseph, not just because, oh yeah, you seem pretty wise. It's like, no, clearly God is with you and is blessing everything that you do. Right. Therefore, you're in charge.
So this is the big thing that I wanted to hit on is, so Joseph gets wine taster, gets Joseph in the room to interpret the dreams. Joseph's like 7 years of blessing, 7 years of famine. Or 7 years of abundance, I guess. More blessing, whatever. Doesn't matter.
Get a ball of extra grain and store it up for the famine. That's his plan.
And Pharaoh's like, okay, I'm putting you in charge of this, Joseph. You're going to be second in command. And they jump out of the story where Artie's like, he put Joseph in charge? And Bernard's like, yeah, Joseph was clearly the wisest man around. Haven't you been listening? And it's like, this is not about Joseph's merits. And I hate that Bernard is that's the point he's pushing. Well, it's this is your chance to be God was on Joseph's side, and even Pharaoh could see that. God is so powerful. That's why that's why Joseph, God is sovereign. He moved in Pharaoh's heart to make it happen, or he, whatever however you want to frame it.
Wisdom.
Right.
Just throw a little bit out there and just be like, yeah, of course. Pharaoh sensed the great power and wisdom that God had given to Joseph. And, that is one sentence, and that it ties in the theme.
Right. Pharaoh saw that God was on Joseph's side and placed him in charge. Anything other than just, elevating the merits of Joseph in this moment. Where it's like, the fact, if they had just kept moving with the story, it wouldn't have rubbed me so wrong. But because we do a pull out from the story for Bernard to further explain things, and his further explanation is just like, Pharaoh noticed Joseph was smart.
Yeah.
That really bugged me.
Yeah. I feel like this is another one of those moments where you have a theme in mind, and so you miss the actual theme of the story.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like that happened in Job. It happened in the first episode of Joseph, and I feel like that's happening again. And I can't speak for the rest of Odyssey, because, like I said, I don't listen to it very much. But this feels like eisegesis of, this is an idea that I want to talk about, and so I'm going to put it in this story because I can kind of make it about that. And then you miss the points that are actually what's important and that are actually driving the story and what's actually trying to be portrayed by having this in scripture.
Yeah, literary context and stuff. And that's the thing, because Joseph is such an interesting character in the sense of, like, Old Testament figures, we get a lot for how important Joseph is in the founding of Israel and, like, how involved God is with his life and everything. We don't really hear a lot about him as a person outside of it. And that's kind of something that I mentioned a little bit earlier. And so, okay, so you look at that and you read it and you're like, so the point is less of who he is as a person and more so how God used him and how he was a conduit of God's character in, you know, reconciliation and in, like, showing that, you know, I mean, like, if God was, you know, super angry and violent and retributive and stuff like that, like, do you think that he would have sent Joseph to preserve the Egyptians as well as the Israelites? You know, like, you get so much more out of God's character looking at Joseph's actions and how God is represented through them, that his character is kind of, I don't know, for me it's always been in kind of a gray area because they don't talk about it as much as they do other very significant biblical figures. And I think that might be where this episode falls short, is because it is an audio narrative and they're telling this all by people talking this story out. It's really kind of hard to see those actions and be very intentional about conveying what is the literary context and what is the historical context and what is, like, the actual meat and bones of the story.
Even without that, like, last time we talked about Potiphar and him placing Joseph in charge and the jailer placing Joseph in charge. They just mentioned that he was placed in charge. In the text, in the words that they say, the actual words that are written for what Potiphar said, and the reason, not what the jailer said, but the reason that he was put in charge was because God was clearly with him. And even here, Pharaoh says, because God is with you. Like, it's written out in their dialogue. And I understand you don't take it word from the text, and that's okay. It's not, well, we've talked about this before, and I struggle because they're portraying it like it's the text, but it's not. If you don't take it from the text word for word, okay, but at least get the actual gist of what the text is saying, which I feel like they completely missed throughout this episode and the one before it, because the key part that's in the dialogue that they're recreating, they miss.
Which is so interesting because I think that Odyssey does a really good job with that in the Imagination Station episodes or the Room of Consequence episodes and things like that, where when they use a different method other than characters established telling a story, I feel like they do a much better job of actually representing what the scripture, like the full scripture value. Not, more, not necessarily all of it. I'm looking at you, Mortal Coil, but
Right. The thing I think is interesting is, like, they clearly decided first, hey, we're going to talk about Joseph. And then they went to Joseph and were like, okay, what are themes that we can pull from this that kids will understand and relate to? and they decided on large families and revenge for whatever reason. It's really, really annoying because... So maybe the thought is just like, the sovereignty of God is not a lesson that kids are going to get. However, there are other episodes of Odyssey that portray that really, really well. Well, the one that like jumps to the front of my mind is Karen off the third album, which is all about like God being in control, even though like circumstances are bad, and just like the fact that the show can do that and can communicate that well and like make an impact in that way, but like is in this episode like just doesn't feel like it has the confidence to stick that landing. Yeah. So they're just kind of like, well, that's too big picture for these kids. Let's try and like bring this down to their level.
Yeah, it felt a little phoned in. A little bit. Not necessarily in the bad, like, not necessarily in a way that I felt like ruined it, like, because I definitely enjoyed it as an episode of Adventures in Odyssey, but as, from, like, I think a critical perspective or from a biblical perspective, it definitely doesn't hold a lot of water.
Yeah. So I'm not huge into the Odyssey part of it, so from a biblical perspective, they really beefed this one. Yeah. I think I would call this a fail. Honestly,
yeah, no, I wouldn't call it heretical, but yeah, I definitely think that they missed the shot.
It's not heretical.
That's I'm with Andrew on this.
They missed
right.
it.
Yeah,
they read through the story and they done beefed it.
So, moving on with the story, we then get Joseph being put in charge. Bernard refers to him as the second most famous and powerful man in Egypt. And then Jacob, we cut to Jacob, who sends...
Real quick.
Oh, yeah.
I understand it's audio and it's for kids, but also being put second in charge of Egypt, even in turmoil, like...
Big deal.
That's huge. Like
that's like the world.
Most of the known world at this point, you're now in charge of, which...
Yeah. Most of the civilized world, at least.
Yeah, well, that's really all that was known at that point.
Yeah.
Like, that's huge. Anyway. Yeah.
And so, right. So we now jump to the brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And we're assuming this is now like we are in the famine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the 7 years of prosperity have passed and we're now in, I don't know. I mean, is there scriptural like a clear timeline here, Drew? I was ballparking like we're at like 10 years since Joseph was sold into slavery, was kind of what I was ballparking, just based on like we know it was 2 years that he was in jail, and 7 years at least of the famine, plus we've got like
whatever
a year or two that it took from him to get from Potiphar's to jail. Like I don't know how long he was there, and we don't know how long into the famine it was, but I was like, okay, we're probably talking about like, you know.
It's been a while though. I mean,
right.
Joseph is a grown man now, and there's been a lot of, so Joseph's life, and maybe I'm, just extrapolating here, but it would make a lot of sense for in that time, the next 7 years of wealth, Joseph basically, was on top of the world essentially, and had not seen his family, had not been in contact with that we know of. There's none of that.
Yeah.
And so I guess the question that I have about about the role of God's sovereignty in this is when Joseph's brothers come and all of that, like in this time, in that 7-year period where he's doing really well and like he is operating under the guidance of God's sovereignty, like he's, God's given him insight into things and anointed him to carry out,
So the whole plan is like collect extra grain while we are in these 7 years of prosperity so that we will make it through the 7 years of famine.
Yeah. But so in that time, does he hate his brothers?
Yeah,
we don't get any. Like, we get the result of the reconciliation, which for me, when we talk about the story of Joseph, that's what I think about the most is the God returning all things to Himself despite the most adverse circumstances. We have Joseph obviously kind of getting screwed over left and right, and a lot of time has passed, and I'm just wondering if in those years of prosperity and things like that, especially being in a foreign country, I'm wondering if the reason that we don't hear about it as much is because in this story, if Joseph is this God conduit and we show him in this such positive light, like, is there I want to know the story of God working in Joseph's heart to reconcile his brothers to himself, because you definitely get this very detached view of Joseph where you don't really see much about what his family and friends have done that has affected him emotionally. It's depicted physically and it's shown, but there's not much of that. And I think especially with how much time passed and how much bad things happened to him, before that, like, I could definitely see when, Joseph sees his brothers for the first time in forever, he just despises them and, like, actually, like, doesn't want them at all,
Yeah, so first off, he's around 37 when his brothers come back.
Okay.
Give or take. So it says he was 30 when Pharaoh put him in charge, then 7 years of abundance, then presumably a bit into the famine.
Mm-hmm.
So 37 to 40-ish.
Right.
Give or take.
So we're talking 20 years since he was...
20 and change, yeah. So it's been a hot minute.
Yeah, that's a lot of time.
I mean, it's absolutely fair that we desire to see that work in his life. I think that's a really cool thing that God does that we don't really get a lot of insight into. But I think it's clear, regardless of how it happened, it seems very clear that he doesn't harbor that resentment. He actually seems to harbor some sadness for time lost with his family.
Yeah,
more
definitely.
than anything else.
And maybe the language that I'm missing is that Joseph was a man after God's own heart, and he just really loved God, and in that moment, if it was an ongoing struggle, it was an ongoing struggle that he always had God with him, and so it wasn't addressed. Yeah,
and I think at this point in Scripture, I mean, we see God working in the lives of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Joseph and Moses, but it's not always as clear and as prevalent as someone like David or Solomon. Like, the writer of Genesis, potentially Moses, depending on how you cut and slice this.
Church tradition says Moses.
Yeah. They're retelling these stories, and when you think about it, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, like, those, like, they would probably tell their story pretty easily, but I can imagine for Joseph there may be some struggle in retelling portions of his story that were painful or potentially hard to write about as he was telling, like, his kids or whatever. However the story was passed down, I could see there being, like, a struggle in telling it, or even them just feeling that wasn't necessarily important to the story, or that's not the moral of it, so that's not what I necessarily need to keep written in tradition. For whatever reason, it's not there.
Yeah.
But...
Well, okay, so anyway, that rabbit trail.
Yeah. So the Jacob sends out his all of the brothers, sans Benjamin, to Egypt to get food because they're in the middle of this famine. And I guess word had traveled that Egypt's got some resources here. And so they show up. They all bow down before Joseph, which Artie then interrupts to be like, oh, they all bowed down before Joseph, like the dream. And we're like, and yes, Bernard like and the audience is like, yeah, yep, good job, Artie, proud of you. And so then Joseph does the move where he accuses them of being spies. They respond that they're 12 brothers, and he's like, well, that's clearly a lie. There's only 10 of you. And they're like, well, one's in Canaan, one is dead. I'm just like, why would you
Why would you say 12?
Right. Is this like a specific like cultural historical thing that I'm just missing where you're like, we are 12 brothers, and it's like, do you include the one who's not with you and the one who's not living?
Well, no,
and also like you're also
imagine if your brother had died.
you're in this moment of where like they're all like quivering in fear. Joseph is like, accusing them of being spies, and they're still like, yeah, but like our brother's dead. Like, we're keeping up that lie, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's very important that you know that,
I think that they genuinely believed that he was probably dead because they did just leave him in a ditch.
No, they sold him into slavery.
They sold him into slavery, that's right.
So yeah. I guess you just continue to be bought into the lie and whatnot. But I did. I was like, oh, you're like fearing for your lives, and you're like, no, we must keep this lie going.
Yeah.
Well, I'll also note that later on, when they go back to their dad, which we'll get to then, but like in the Bible, it talks about, he was like, why the heck did you tell them that you have another brother? Like, why did you do that?
Yeah.
And they're like, look, man, he asked us so many, he asked us about you. He asked us about our mom. He asked us about the other one. Like, he asked so many questions. Mm-hmm. So like, clearly they were thrown off guard by, like, he was asking for like a family history essentially.
Yeah.
So one other thing is when Joseph gets like upset. I don't remember how they cover this in the audio. Like where after, so the brothers talk to themselves in prison and are like, "Come on, guys, why could we do this?" And then Reuben hits them back with, "Told you guys not to do it."
Right. Yeah. Right. So there's this thing where the brothers are like, Joseph throws them in prison, and the brothers are all immediately like, "Oh man, this is all recompense for like when we sold our brother into slavery."
Yeah. And then so in the Bible, Reuben's even more saucy than in the audio, and he's like, "Did I not say to you, do not sin against the boy? But you didn't listen, and now behold, his blood has been sought."
Yeah, but like, your hands aren't clean either, Reuben.
No, absolutely not.
Like, he had better intentions, but
he just wanted to beat him up and leave him in a ditch and come back later.
Well, he didn't even want to beat him up. Biblically, he didn't want anything to happen to him, but he knew his brothers were feeling some kind of way. So he was like, "Look, we'll settle for this, but then I'll save him." I think he just didn't get the chance. Either way, he certainly could have handled that differently. But the thing that I want to talk about here specifically is, now they did not know that Joseph understood, for the interpreter was always between them. So like, Joseph only ever spoke to them in Egyptian at this point.
Oh, right.
He doesn't speak to them in Hebrew until he reveals himself. So they don't understand that he can, like, they don't know that he can understand them. And so when they talk about this stuff, like, he can hear it, and he becomes overcome and goes and weeps, which, I don't speak Hebrew, but I know Greek, and I feel like the Septuagint gives us a better understanding than English because there's way more words in Greek than there are in English. The word is kleio, which is like weeping, crying, is used for like the big stuff. Like, it's not just
the
like
big sad.
It's not just like he was upset. Like, he was torn up about this. And
like
that same weeping verb is used a lot when it comes to Joseph in this story, because he is often overcome with emotion, which
they even reference in the audio where they're talking about like when they arrived, like he retreated, excused himself.
Yeah. But I feel like, again, a little nitpicky, I guess, but especially when the brothers, like, when they do like the whole revealing situation, like, I feel like they play down his emotion by like 100 notches. And like, yeah, we can get into that later. But I feel consistently they kind of play down how he's...
Right, well, because it's a story about upset. Joseph not taking out revenge on them.
Sure, rather than having feelings and being reunited with his family.
The other thing from this scene that I think is fun is Simeon just like starting to rant and everyone in unison yelling, "Keep quiet, Simeon."
Yeah.
I enjoy that.
We love it.
And then Joseph's like, "All right, everyone but it's Simeon who he keeps in jail, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And then everyone else gets sent home to get Benjamin.
They want to go back and get Benjamin, and then the dad's like, or Jacob's like, no, can't do that.
But more importantly, he also puts money in the sacks of grain.
Yeah.
To which Bernard says, "What a prankster!"
Yeah. Well, yeah,
they about to die, dude. That ain't a prank. That's a death sentence.
Stealing from Pharaoh, yeah, that's pretty tough.
The biblical little phrase there for how they felt is their hearts failed them. They trembled and asked, "What is this God has done to us?" Like, clearly this is not just a little goofy prankster. This is, oh crap, we finna die.
Yeah.
Well, and then, right, and so when Jacob finds out about that, he hit the ceiling. Well, he hit the top of his tent.
Yeah.
Gosh, it's so dumb.
It's more comfortable than the ceiling. There's a good give. Most tents.
Also, Reuben doesn't just say, like, I swear on my sons. In the Bible, in any English translation too, because it's so clear, he's like, if I don't bring back Benjamin, kill my kids.
Yep.
Like, that's straight up. Like,
yep.
kill my 2 sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my hands and I will bring him back to you. Or kill my 2 sons. Like,
well, and the whole thing and he mentions it, it's like, okay, I get it that you really don't want to lose this guy, but like you're gonna lose him regardless because there's a famine. Like we're all just gonna starve to death. And
and that point after, like, does it say how much time passes?
No.
Here, because it's gotta be a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because there was a ton of grain.
Right, because they were all given a sack of grain. Now, granted, part of that sack of grain was money, but, like, still.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of them.
Yeah, there's all of them, all of their servants, all of their livestock, all of... Like, there's a lot of people there. But even
Reuben's
still...
2 sons.
Sure. All of their wives.
They all have wives, and most of them have children.
Yeah.
Like...
And all of their servants, which are also a lot.
Right.
So... They got some people to feed.
Maybe some of them have multiple wives.
We need grain.
Regardless, now the famine of the land was severe, and it happened that they finished eating the grain in which they had brought from Egypt, and their father said to them, "Return and buy a little food." So, and then he ends up giving him to Judah. Mm-hmm. Benjamin, I mean. Mm-hmm. Jacob gives Benjamin to Judah, not Reuben, even though Reuben said, "Kill my kids if I don't bring him back."
And the audio the audio puts everything on Reuben.
I don't remember.
Well, because it's like later. I don't know if it does at this point really hammer it home, but it's Reuben who offers up his life
it was
later.
Judah, I thought it was
no. In exchange for,
I'm pretty sure
Benjamin with the silver cup.
I'm pretty sure.
No, Simeon. Simeon offers to be a slave for Benjamin.
Oh, okay.
Huh. Okay. Well, Judah does it in the.
Interesting. And maybe we're wrong on that. It was also a thing where I'm like, I could have written down notes.
I also could have written them incorrectly. But
yeah, I have Reuben pleading for his life. Andrew has Simeon. The Bible has Judah. Yeah. We'll just give Odyssey the benefit of the doubt and say that they did adapt it correctly, and it's Judah.
Yeah. Sure. Either way, Judah does it. Judah takes him and brings him back. So that's cool. Mm-hmm. They also brought, which they don't mention in the audio, but they mention in the Bible, they brought double the money to pay him for the first round and this next round of grain. So they do try and repay him. Mm-hmm. And in the Bible, when they get there, and they tell him, like, "Sir, we found money in the bag, blah, blah, blah." He's like, "Clearly your God must be with you. The money that should have been was paid to me. So that's just yours. Right. Don't worry about it."
In the audio, they are just kind of like, they didn't even care. Like, they're talking amongst themselves, and they were like, they didn't even really care when we gave them the money back.
Yeah.
Well, and then they feast, don't they?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's this big feast, and Benjamin gets all the special treatment and everything, and then we get the brothers kind of talking about it and being like, "Yeah, I mean, did you notice, like, they seated us according to age, and, like, he was asking all these questions, like, he knows us really well, and there's something weird here, like, we should leave soon."
Yeah, right. The seating according to age is fun. The other point where we kind of get that thing is when they're initially sent home with the grain, and they're to go get Benjamin, Joseph says, like, go bring the youngest brother, and like as they're leaving, you hear them talking on themselves, like,
how do
youngest?
You know it was the youngest?
Kind of like that, like, right.
I'll also say that this is where I really feel like the emotion is kind of downplayed.
Yeah.
It's a feast. It's a party. We're all having fun.
Sure. But and also that little side conversation that they have later, I think it's Judah and Reuben, or Simeon and Reuben, either way. The little side conversation they have isn't there. But I understand they don't have the text to write out these things, so that's fine. But, like, the whole thing is, like, they were afraid because they were brought to Joseph. And then they tried to give him the money, but they didn't take it. And then they... Peace to you, don't be afraid. Must have given you treasure because your money came to me. So then he brought Simeon to them, and they went further into Joseph's house, gave them water and washed their feet, gave them fodder for the donkeys, which must have been horribly confusing. Horribly confusing. There's the words. Then they laid out the gift until Joseph came at noon, which is essentially like they laid out the meal. And they heard that they were to eat food there, which they should not.
Yeah, they mentioned
Egyptians aren't allowed to eat food
with Hebrews, which they mentioned in the episode.
Which they talk about in there too. They bowed before him on the ground. This is the first time they actually mentioned bowing before him in the Bible. It's not mentioned
interesting.
Before.
It's not in the previous scene.
Yeah, this is where they actually bow. And then he asks if their father is still alive, which is weird. Saw Benjamin and puts a blessing on him. Mm-hmm. Then he becomes overcome with emotion again, which they don't mention, and he sought for a place to cry. Then he went into a room and wept there. Then he washed his face and went out, now controlling himself. And he said, serve the food. And they served him.
Yeah.
So, like, a lot of things happen there.
Right.
And it's like 30 seconds in audio.
Yep.
And, like, this is like the rising action. This is where it's coming to the head. And they're just like, yeah, they had a good little meal, and they were a little confused about, some of the things that happened, but it's fine. Yeah. Like,
yep.
No,
but no,
this is huge.
No, it doesn't matter, clearly. So they're set according to their age, and then Joseph they feast, and then Joseph pulls his like attendant to the side and is like, hey, put my silver cup in the sack for the youngest one.
Mm-hmm. He says give everybody as much grain as they can carry,
give them their money back.
Give them their money back, and put this silver cup in the youngest one's bag.
Yep.
And then
they go through and they slice the bags open, going oldest to youngest.
Yep.
Dramatic tension building.
Yeah.
Slice open Benjamin's. The cup's in there. Everyone freaks out.
Everywhere.
And Joseph's like, all right, I'm taking Benjamin as a slave.
Yep.
He's like, only the one who had the cup needs to be my servant. No one else. Now, This part, okay. This audio, I think, is the best clip of audio in the entirety of any Odyssey that I've listened to, where whoever it is that's talking to Joseph pleads and begs to be the servant instead of Benjamin.
Yeah, it's so good.
Like, that's the emotion that I want in the whole freaking thing. Why is it only here? Like, this is a great, like, if you only have one,
I'm glad that they made
you only have one good one in you, this is the place for it. But also, really, you couldn't eke out, like, a quarter of this for earlier? Like, just spread it out, like, a little bit.
Yeah.
Like,
just let anybody feel things.
It's so good, and I wish that there was more of it, because, like, this, it made me feel something.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I want.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, the brother pleading for Benjamin's life is so good. And then Joseph reveals himself and just has like a quick line where he's like, yeah, and this was all God's plan.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then the story ends.
Yeah,
We do hear like Jacob moved his whole family to Egypt.
Yeah.
And where they were going to stay for a while, and then Moses happened, and
then Artie's like, tell me about Moses.
And Bernard's like, no, I'm not a good storyteller.
Yeah. Also, the way they talk about Moses, it sounds like he's doing a bad thing. Like, everything was happily ever after. Well, until Moses. Like,
yeah.
No, it was worse off, and then Moses came and fixed it.
Right.
Like,
Things were good, and then it got bad. You just forgot about that part.
The next landmark Bible story is Moses.
Well, because
when things are bad.
Yes.
This is the problem, because if you want to, the problem with bringing Moses into it is then you have to say that Joseph inevitably got the Israelites into slavery.
Well, no, Joseph just died. He didn't get them into slavery.
No, yeah, I know, but that's the line that's being drawn. It's like,
so many things. So first off, this I just thought was interesting, not necessarily a huge thing, but worth note for interesting sake. Joseph wept so loudly after he had his servants leave that both his entire house and all of Pharaoh's house, presumably adjacent, heard it. Like, everyone heard it. Like, that's how loud the boy was weeping.
As a person who's only shed tears a couple times, not by my own choice, that is incomprehensible.
Yeah.
I could do it. I can get pretty loud.
That's fair. You make a strong point. And they didn't really have, like, quality doors or soundproofing. Like, your windows were just open.
Yeah.
So, maybe.
Yeah.
But either way.
These are also, presumably, large houses.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. And probably not next door neighbors, presumably. My guess is somebody
probably
has
pretty close. He's probably in the royal court.
Yeah.
But either way, he was weeping pretty loud. And the reason that they mention that is because Joseph doesn't ask for Abraham or Jacob to come live with them. Mm-hmm. Pharaoh approaches him and says, "Hey, man, like, why don't you get your whole family? Come on over here.
Bring the whole family down."
And like, this is
Old West Fun World.
Like,
Spatula City.
The goodness of what happens next is completely cut out. And this is also where you miss the whole moral of the story, because Pharaoh commands that Joseph's family come and live in the best part of Egypt, which is Goshen. It has like the best land. It's top notch. So they lived there. They came as shepherds. They watched over not only their flocks, but the flocks of Pharaoh. And as we all know, livestock is money. So they're essentially keeping the Pharaoh's money. They're in charge of his wealth. He consolidated power in Egypt, Joseph did, to the Pharaoh by purchasing people and their land for food. Because eventually the food ran out even in Egypt, but Joseph still had some stored up. So they came to him and were like, "I need food." And Joseph was like, "Oh, here's a great way to end some of this turmoil." So essentially, he purchases all of their land and them as servants. The entire country of Egypt is now owned by Pharaoh, the people inside of it and everything, except for the priests, which they mentioned. There's a whole bit about that. But essentially, everything is owned by Pharaoh. So 1/5 of all crops, 1/4 of all livestock now are given to Pharaoh every year. Like, it's just how it works. And this brings consolidated power to Pharaoh, which eventually ends the second intermediate period and brings around the next phase of Egypt's power, which is one of arguably the best stages of Egyptian power in the entire world and all of history. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, Egypt was balling out since the beginning, honestly.
And all of this to underline God's sovereignty.
And
which we get in a nice throwaway line of just like, "Oh yeah, this was all God. You know, it's okay, brothers, that all this happened to me. It was God's plan." It's like, great, thank you. Bernard, can you, like, hit that a little bit harder? No, I can't. The episode's over.
And I don't want to talk about it because I'm not a storyteller.
Right.
And if Focus on the Family chose to read down into chapter 50, which is a little bit later, you know, this is after Jacob dies, you get the real crux of it, which in verse 15, I'm just going to read 15 to 21. It's not that long. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "It will be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him." So they sent word to Joseph, saying, "Your father commanded us before his death, saying, thus you must say to Joseph, 'Oh, please, now forgive the transgressions of your brothers and their sin, for they did evil to you. So now please forgive the transgressions of the servants of the God of your father.' And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Then his brothers went also and fell before him and said, 'Behold, we are your servants.' Then Joseph said to them, 'Do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you planned evil against me, but God planned it for good, in order to do this, to keep many people alive, as it is today, So then, do not be afraid, for I myself will provide for you and your little ones. And he consoled them and spoke kindly to them.
Hey.
It's almost like
there's a moral in
writer
the story.
just gave it to you. There's 6 verses. You could read that crap line for line, and you have a better moral of the story, a more accurate moral of the story, and it's just a better one. It's just good.
It's a better ending. It's a better ending by far
than just he didn't take revenge on his brothers.
Yep.
Like,
oh yeah,
he didn't do it. And here's probably my biggest gripe with this. There's no reason that they give why you shouldn't take. Yes, exactly. My biggest prune. Like, they don't give a reason why you shouldn't take revenge. They just say don't do it.
Right.
And like, there's so many good reasons not to take revenge, and so many good stories that talk about
I was
them.
going to say, there are so many good revenge stories in the Bible that would underline, hey, these are the bad things that can happen if you take revenge.
Yep.
But we aren't covering that.
And they choose this one. So it's just don't take revenge, which, I mean, I guess, yes, you shouldn't take revenge. And that he doesn't take revenge, and so you can snag it. But, like, that's not...
But they don't even give him emotions. They don't even talk about the struggle. They don't even talk about the choices
right. We don't
that he's
see
making.
his turmoil in... Like, there's not a point in this story where it feels like Joseph wants to take revenge.
Exactly.
And then, like, decides not to. Unless you'd argue that him kind of messing with his brothers is a form of vengeance.
But in that case, he took revenge.
Right.
But well, and in the same respect, he says it so plainly, and it's so deadpan in a lot of ways, at least how it came across to me, from the episode, that, like, yeah, like, he didn't even have ill will. There was just nothing there. Like, he always knew that it was going to work out, and so he was just kind of like, baseline. Like, there was no spike in, aggression or, even what you said, like him literally running away to weep. Like, you don't really get a lot of that kind of emotion conveyed in the episode, that, like, there's this big internal struggle going on, because, yeah, this is an excellent story about how God resolves differences differently than man does. Like, in Egypt, yeah, like, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, he's gonna get him back. And, in this, we see, okay, God blessing Joseph looks like God returning Joseph's family to him via reconciliation.
I feel like the story of Joseph, while it talks about God's sovereignty, which can be a difficult topic, it's a pretty easy softball right down the middle.
It's a good story
of exactly what it's trying to say. It mentions God's sovereignty every time Joseph does something good. It is directly related to God doing it through him. It says it explicitly every single time. Yep. And at the very end, like, when he's asked why he didn't take revenge on them, it's don't be afraid, for I'm not in the place of God. Because God's going to deal with it. God is sovereign. He's made these decisions already. Like, it's not my place to do that. And it's so clear, and it's so good. And they miss it.
I just want Odyssey to revisit Joseph now.
Yeah.
It's been like almost 50 albums.
Do a Bernard and Joseph part 2.
Well, Bernard's dead.
I will. That's fine. Get Bernard 2.0. I don't know. Whoever you want to do it.
Guys.
Who's the new window washer? There's got to be someone, right? The windows aren't dirty.
I will point out that there are, just looking at the wiki real quick, there are 2 BTV episodes that include Joseph in them.
And what are the morals of their story?
I don't know.
Okay.
But BTV, well, so one is BTV Temptation and one is BTV Revenge. So probably not what you want from your Joseph story.
I wish that you could see the look on Drew's face right now. It is whelp.
Listen.
He has a feeling of whelp.
Listen, focus on the family. I appreciate all that you do. I appreciate the impact that you've had on my childhood and the childhood of many other Christians and non-Christians alike. You do some great work, okay? I love the things that you do. Don't hate you collectively. But please, why? It's right there. There's 6 verses, 50, 15 to 21. Go ahead, quick read. I will gladly work with you to make a new one. I will help. You don't even have to pay me. Just...
No, you should pay him, for sure.
Whatever. Just please. Please? I don't know how else to ask.
Pretty please.
Maybe with a cherry on top.
Tweet at him.
And we won't make it a two-parter if we do this again. Just saying. I'm very upset because this is such...
I want an Imagination Station Joseph episode. I'm so upset that hasn't existed.
This is such a beautiful story.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's so powerful when you understand what it's actually saying. And you basically just... You cut him at the knees, and you dumbed this down in a way that isn't even just kid-friendly. It's... You've ruined the moral of the story.
Yeah. So that's Bernard and Joseph Part 2. Oh, we should mention that Whit shows up at the end to tell Bernard that, oh, were you just talking with Artie? He comes from a big family. I bet he would like the story of Joseph.
Yeah.
And then Bernard screams and runs away.
That's all good Odyssey episode ends.
He doesn't want this responsibility.
He doesn't want the fame. He just wants to wash windows, you know? Yeah. He doesn't want all the drama.
And that's the episode. Discussion questions, guys.
Oh, yeah, hit me with them.
Number 1, how would you have treated your siblings if you had been in Joseph's position?
I'm really close with my siblings, and they've hurt me a lot in the past, so I don't really care. I mean, not necessarily they've hurt me a lot in the past. Nothing to that extreme, but like, I've gotten
your
over
siblings
stuff
haven't sold you into slavery?
Not yet.
There's still time.
Yeah,
I mean, Joseph was only 17.
It's true.
You're not that far removed. It is still a possibility.
Yeah, no.
Brendan is still bigger than you.
It's true. Actually, I weigh more than him now.
Never mind. Brendan is not bigger than you.
The then other question is, why was Joseph able to be so kind to them?
Jesus!
Hey guys, it's almost like if you got the lesson right, you'd be able to answer that. But at this point, based on what you've told me, it's just because Joseph's a good dude, which I don't think is biblically accurate or what you want to portray. Think about that.
Well done, Drew. You have summed up my exact thoughts, which is both of these episodes, the discussion questions are for the story of Joseph, not for the episodes. It's great.
I would love to see what happened to children who listened to this in Sunday school as a part of it, and then the next week they read the story together, and they were like, wait a minute.
I feel like that's the issue, and it's the same with Bernard and Job. Like when you listen to what the audio is telling you is happening, right? You get a very specific idea of what the story of Joseph is about, which is it's not that bad being in a big family because Joseph had it worse, and then you should forgive other people. Or in Job, if I remember correctly, it was just like, why do bad things happen to good people or something like that. It wasn't directly related to what Job is actually trying to teach you. And when you actually read through it, you get a completely different story, which is the problem with these, I think, is what I'm realizing now. It's not even that they try and portray themselves as scripture, which I do have a problem with, but it's the fact that when they try and teach the Bible story, they're not even teaching you the Bible story. They're teaching you some other random lesson that is tangentially related to the Bible story.
Well, and that's the thing that I think that I struggle with a lot with Christian media is we have a certain lack of self-awareness in the sense that, like, not everybody... If you want to speak in authority, you need to have the education to back it up, because if you want to tell a Bible story, you need to know what it says, because it's dangerous to put other stuff on it, And I could imagine if you were somebody who grew up reading the Bible and getting that from this story, and you found yourself on task as a writer, that you would do that. And I'm not saying that the person who wrote the episode Phil Waller doesn't have any biblical knowledge or academic whatever. I don't know what his credentials are, but I think that it's very important when you tell Bible stories, especially to kids, to respect the text and respect the children. You need to respect the children's ability to understand and God's ability to communicate to them through his word. And you also need to respect the word itself and not to approach it humbly. Approach it looking to learn with a fresh mind every time you read it. Not to reaffirm anything that you already have or to push back against anything you disagree with, but to just take it for what it is and let the Spirit guide you. Let God use his word to tell you it, not tell yourself it and then back it up in God's word.
And there's so many people who are so well educated, far more educated than me, who
still do that.
Well, yeah, but I was also just going to say there are people with wonderful biblical education who can help create these kinds of things, but I don't know where it goes wrong. I don't know what happens in the process of creating these stories, not just Odyssey or whatever, but Christian media in general. I don't know where the disconnect is between Christian media and academic Christianity, where that happens, but I feel like this is a pretty huge trend and I feel like it's pretty easily avoidable. I work at a Bible college. I know a lot of the Bible professors there would be more than happy to, without being paid, to just sit, have coffee with you and talk through a Bible story. Not even a student, just random people. I've seen them do that. You have these resources that you can email, that you can reach out to. There are so many good books written on all of these different stories, commentaries, or just read the Bible yourself. I struggle to find where it happens that the moral of Joseph comes out to be big families or revenge.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Or do what we do and just get Drew on an episode of your podcast.
Exactly.
Sure.
Are we gonna do the star
rage
thing? Because I'm going 2, 1 maybe.
Do what?
Do a star rating?
Yeah.
Did we do that last time?
Yeah, we did that last time.
We did do that last time. I gave it a 2.5.
Yeah, this one's 2.
Time.
I gave it 3.
I don't know. 1.5. This is barely.
Yeah.
It's barely an episode.
So here's what I'm thinking. I am going to give this one a 3 because hear me out. So I gave the other one a 2.5, and the reason I did that is because its topic was God's sovereignty and it talked about big families. This one, at the bare minimum, kept the idea of revenge from point A to point B.
Hey,
was it bad? Yes, but at least there was a moral.
They picked the plot and they did stick to it.
Now, that's an Odyssey rating. If we're going theological, I'm going to give both of them collectively as the Joseph story a 0.5 star.
Yeah.
But here's the thing: is the revenge point is only mentioned in Chris's intro and Chris's wrap up.
But they mentioned it once. The God's sovereignty was not even spoken of. They didn't even mention it.
There is no discussion of revenge in the body of the episode. It's
fair.
just bookended by it.
Okay, here's the thing. All right. You make a fair point. I feel like I need to revise both of mine because I feel like they were both terrible. And I gave the other one a 2.5 because you both gave it a 3, and I feel like there was some pressure there. I think I might have gave it a 3.5. I feel like there was some pressure there. So now that I don't care and I'm a little bit more tired and I haven't had as much coffee, we're just gonna go for it. I think episode 1 probably gets a 1.5. Episode 2, I'm going to give a 1. And then collectively, as a series, I'm going to hit it with a 0 out of 5. Because, 1, I don't really care about the Odyssey portion. That's just me, and I get it. To some people, that's important, and that's great. And if the Odyssey part was good to you, then that's good to you, and that's... But sure, that's more
it's not your
subjective. Yeah. But as far as moral of the story, content, biblical accuracy, there's just 0 out of 5 stars. The entire moral of the story was lost when it was written to you in 6 verses in chapter 50, 15 to 21. Focus on the family. If you hear this again, Genesis 50 verses 15 to 21, it's right there. I will give you a pass if you take 2. Like, I will, yeah, go for it.
There's still time.
Would you come back on the pod to cover a Bernard and Joseph episode if they were to put out a new one?
Absolutely. I'd come back on to cover if they do anything with Bernard and Joe, like if they do a remake of any of these, any of the ones that I talk about, even one that I haven't talked about yet, I will listen to the first one and the new one, and then we'll talk about it. I'm willing to revisit and say that you guys did an amazing job if you do an amazing job. Like, I'm not opposed to you. I don't want to say you did a bad thing, but this just doesn't feel...
You wrote a bad song, PT.
Doesn't feel good to me.
Yeah.
That's all I got. That's all she wrote for me. Do you got anything you want to tell the listeners about? Anything you want to plug today?
I mean, again, you can hit me up on the Twitter, at Andrew B. Huber 1. There's my 2 episodes of the Andrew Acebo podcast.
Whoop, whoop.
Previous, I guess, 2 episodes now of the Wad Fam Chalk Pod, Bernard and Joe Part 1.
What?
Or Bernard and Joe, it's just 1.
Yep.
Well done on keeping it in 1 episode. And then Bernard and Joseph Part 1 from last week. But yeah.
There you go.
I think that's about all she wrote.
Very cool.
Well, despite this being a slightly lackluster episode, I have had a delightful time talking about it with everybody.
It is
and I would
great
like to
having
end on
you
a
here,
positive note.
Drew.
Absolutely.
I appreciate your biblical knowledge, and yeah, episodes we wouldn't talk about if not for you.
Yeah,
so.
I'm happy to be back, and I'm happy to give it another swing if at some point you have some more guesties.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I'm going to call your guest episodes.
Tweet at us and or Drew if you like us talking about the Bible and want this to happen more. So that is it for the episode.
Yeah.
I'm glad we did this.
Yeah.
And next week we're going to be back with a special guest to talk about the episode 60s something.
Yeah.
So, come listen to that with us, and we'll talk about it then. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Deuces.
WadFam Chalk Pod is a presentation of the Lidditz Podcast Co-op. This show is a fan podcast and has no official affiliation with Adventures in Odyssey or Focus on the Family. As such, the copyright is ours under Creative Commons. Follow the podcast at WadFam Chalk Pod on Twitter and Instagram, or email us at wadfamchalkpod@gmail.com. Bernard and Joseph Part 2 was hosted by Dylan Weaver and Andrew Acebo, with special guest Drew Huber. It was edited by Dylan Weaver. And I'm Nathan Haverstick, hoping you'll join us again next time for more of the Wad Fam Chalk Pod.